Good morning to you. Mark Sell with HurricaneTrack.com here with your Hurricane Outlook and discussion for Friday, May 25th, 2018. We need to talk about Invest Area 90L. Eventually going to be, I think, almost a shoe-in to be Tropical Storm Alberto. The subtropical part that gets mentioned in the Tropical Weather Outlook, which is kind of cut off here in the mouse-over version. So let's look at the text product. They mentioned subtropical development. I think that it'll probably just be tropical. And that's, again, I mentioned this yesterday, the academic part, the scientific classification. It's going to be a storm system over the Gulf of Mexico with impacts, and people need to be thinking about that over the next several days. So as such, the probability is up to 90% in both the near term and the next 5 days. So this is almost a certainty to happen in terms of this becoming a storm of some classification over the Gulf of Mexico, and then it's a matter of how strong and what the structure is like and what the impacts will be. So here's what we know from the overnight hours. We can see a marked increase from yesterday down here off the coast of Belize and the Yucatan Peninsula and towards the Yucatan Channel here. Very steady increase overnight in the organization and the aerial extent of the shower and thunderstorm activity. Water temperatures all through here. Very warm in the low 80s Fahrenheit. There is still a large area of stronger upper level winds cutting across this region, and you can see that extends all the way out across Florida, the upper level flow cutting across the top of this system. But as that relaxes, and it's presumed to do so by some of the models, and we'll look at that in just a moment, in this region up through here we could see some rather modest intensification, and that may bring some big problems beyond the advertised and much talked about heavy rainfall. This is going to be a slow moving system, and that's a big problem in and of itself as well. So what's changed overnight? Well, this is a good friend of ours at HurricaneTrack.com. We call him Delaware Steve, and you can tell where he's from. So what a difference. Here's the GFS. We'll look at that, and it's got a landfall of a, what would you call that? A not robust tropical storm. I'm trying to think of the word here. It's a nuisance system that will ruin some Memorial Day weekend plans. Probably not Saturday, and probably a good deal of Sunday will be okay, but Memorial Day itself, Monday into Tuesday, yuck. And so this is, a pain in the rear. All right, we can just say that. And that's the GFS. This is the Euro. The Euro is a completely different animal. It's basically indicating the possibility of a hurricane in May. Now, it's right at the precipice here of reaching June, and so climatology-wise, you can say, well, it's outside the hurricane season, but only by a couple of days. So this is a big difference here for the most part, and you say, well, there's not that much of a difference between a tropical storm and a Category 1 hurricane. We're not talking about a major hurricane, but in this instance, a fairly weak tropical storm where the winds and everything are on the right-hand side versus the more stacked and symmetrical. I mean, that looks like a hurricane symbol, doesn't it? Euro, that's a problem, and I don't know which one's going to be correct. We could delve into all the layers and all the features of the models, but man, that's going to get boring real quick. So the best thing to do is just to keep kind of monitoring how this goes and try to think about some of the consistencies that we have seen in the European, at least for the last few runs, has been very consistent at developing this. And in fact, each run seems to be getting a little stronger. On the 0Z run last night, it gets it down to 983 millibars for a surface low pressure. And that would certainly be in the neighborhood of supporting hurricane conditions with the wind field. So this is a lot different than just a wet tropical storm that's going to bring 10 to 20 inches of rain to some places. So we'll have to just wait and see how this pans out. I don't have the answers. So looking at a few other things, the ensembles, this is the GFS ensembles. What is that? Well, you have your operational deterministic run of these different models, and then you have your ensembles where, in my analogy that I've used over the years, let's say that the operational run might be the opera singer, or the lead singer of behind a symphonic orchestra. Is opera singer the right way to call it? And then all the rest of the members of the orchestra support that singer and make everything come together. Okay? Or the conductor is the operational run, whatever. And then you have all these supporting members, the woodwinds, the brass, everybody else. And if they're all in tune and doing well, you have a beautiful production. And so the ensemble members of the models are the same way. When they all look similar, that's good agreement. And we're talking track here, not intensity at this point. And so this is the overnight 0 UTC. We also call that 0Z. Let me get rid of this tab right here because it's trying to bog down my system. Go back. So this is the 0Z run of the GFS ensembles, and for the first few days, it is fairly tightly clustered. So that's good to see in terms of being reliable. We don't have a bunch over here and stuff, it's just a big mess. Obviously, the further out in time we go, you're going to have more spread. And that's fine out here at these later time periods. It's this part up here, the first couple of days or so, maybe first 3 days, where the agreement is very good, generally speaking. They're not all going to be right on top of each other, or what's the purpose of having ensembles? What they are different, and this is like my analogy, they are different versions of the model, so to speak, with different, well, it's the same version, but it's different input parameters, so you get different output. It's like if you have a 10-piece wind section, not everybody can play the notes exactly right. They're always going to be a little bit just, slightly off, and so that's how you get that chorus effect and the beauty of a symphony. And in this case, the beauty of the ensembles is they tell us about trends, and they tell us about reliability and the overall guidance package. And for the most part, without any weird things happening, that envelope says sort of a curve back towards the west, northwest, or northwest towards the central Gulf Coast. And while we might not like the end result, it's good to see that this is at least fairly consistent. Does that make sense? I hope so. That's the GFS, and here's the European ensembles. This one coming from weathernerds.org. These other ones, this was from the NCAR site. I just want to make sure I always cite where I get these from. So this is the European ensemble package, and it's very similar. But in this one, we see intensity indicated with some of these green shadings in here, and it's indicating to some extent fairly modest strengthening as well, 40 to 50 knots perhaps. Some of these ensemble members also indicating a rather strong tropical storm, certainly not just a depression. Okay, so we've talked about at first this being, quote, a big rainmaker, and that's about it, as if that, trust me, the rain part is going to be a big deal. But now we're talking about the possibility of more impacts on top of that. So let's just, for the sake of argument, say that this comes in as a 50-knot tropical storm. All right, so that's about 60-mile-per-hour winds in some of the heavier bands or whatever. Well, if you've got saturated ground and 60-mile-per-hour winds from time to time, they're not going to be everywhere. Spotty, whatever, especially in the heavier convective bands, you're going to knock some trees down, and that's going to knock the power out, and that's going to make travel a huge mess. It's also, in this vulnerable part of the Gulf of Mexico up here, going to pile up the water, especially if we have a track where it's coming in, from the east-southeast to the west-northwest. That's going to efficiently pile in the Mississippi Sound, for example, if it gets that far west, piling in to southeast Louisiana. So we really need to watch this. Always have to emphasize, you don't have to have a hurricane, and you don't have to have a major hurricane at that to have major problems. And this is what we're faced with, and I'm not sure exactly how this is going to turn out. Why is the European suggesting such a stronger version of this storm than the GFS? I don't have the answer. We'll have to wait and see how it plays out. Maybe we get more agreement on that later on. But this is what it looks like. And this is from the weather.us model site. and a nice close-up, higher resolution version showing the wind field of this system with a calm center and these convective bands wrapping around, and very, very strong winds on the order of hurricane force, as we can see over here in the scale. All right, so this is problematic mainly because we have a discrepancy in the two globals here, with the GFS being weaker, showing a more sheared system, and the European showing a more organized, compact system. And now that we're down to within 3 to 4 days, we're not talking about a week out where you can just dismiss it as the models just don't understand the pattern that far out. Within 3 days, I would hope that we'd have better agreement here on intensity. At least the track is starting to maybe hone in a little bit, so maybe somewhere in the panhandle through Alabama to Mississippi. Big question mark on that. And then the intensity should be an even bigger question mark on that, because, wow, I'm a little bit miffed as to why this is happening. And it shows we're going to have to really watch this pretty closely. All right? So that's all that I have from the overnight runs. Once the morning runs of these models, GFS, Euro, come out, then later this afternoon, I'll come in and I'll do another video blog, and we will discuss what we've learned since now. Does that make sense? All right, you can tell I was up late last night, got a few hours of sleep, and then we're talking about this here. So a lot of this will matter for me too, because I plan on heading down to the Gulf Coast, maybe leaving as early as this evening, but certainly by tomorrow morning. Exactly where, I don't know. So we'll have to see, obviously with me and setting up equipment, where's that going to be? I don't know yet. So we'll all learn this together. All right, again, thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it very much. I am Mark Sudduth for HurricaneTrack.com. Thanks, as always, for watching and listening. I'll have more for you later this afternoon.